Hi, I'm Molly.
And I'm Andrew.
Uh, and we're so glad that you're here. Welcome to How We Show Up Part 1. It's a pleasure and privilege to be with you here tonight. We'd love to know where you're coming from and how you heard about this webinar. So please drop that in the chat now.
Yeah, this is our second webinar. The first one was the Integrated Schools Movement, Where We Begin. And that was really designed as an introduction to integrated schools and the movement that we're a part of. If you watched it, hopefully you came away with a deeper understanding of how our schools got to be so segregated, why that's a problem, and what we can do as people with racial or economic privilege to push back. If you're new to integrated schools and you find yourself here tonight, we are so happy to have you. And we urge you to check out the first webinar and the other resources in the resource list that we'll be sending out after the event. Tonight, we're skipping over a lot of what we covered there. So if you're feeling lost or that we've made a leap, it's not you, it's us. And you can find us back there in that webinar giving that context. There's also plenty we won't be talking about tonight, but we'll hopefully get to in future webinars.
So talking from the place of integrated schools broadly, we say we. Who's the we, the us? And relatedly, why is integrated schools so white? White people have consistently fought against policies that would put our children in schools with majority Black and brown children or avoided enrolling our children in those schools. To the extent that we have enrolled our children in these schools, we've often treated diversity primarily as a commodity for the benefit of our own children and or entered these schools with the assumption that they're broken and need white people to fix them. It's important to say here tonight that while we're majority white, integrated schools movement and mission includes parents of color who have racial or economic privilege or both. We work alongside each other as we interrogate our own school choices and how we interact with schools. The goal of truly integrated schools is the same. However, our conversations around anti-racist school integration and anti-racist parenting are often different. What unites us is the belief that our collective liberation is rooted in confronting our anti-Black racism and white supremacy culture. As our movement grows, so does our commitment to meet everyone as they come to us in their own identities. This whiteness work is not just for white people, but it's definitely for white people.
Yeah. So that's the who of the integrated schools movement. But before we jump in, we also want to share our what, why, and how to ground us in what we view at integrated schools as our work. So integrated schools exist so that children can learn together and create a true multiracial democracy. We're building a movement of parents and caregivers working to redress the imbalance of racial and economic power in our systems of education. And we do that through relationship building, education, self-reflection, and behavior change. What we're striving for is something we've taken to calling third wave school desegregation. Different from past attempts at school desegregation, third wave really tries to get at meaningful integration. So rather than just moving bodies around, we're talking about creating new forms of shared power and finding common humanity. For more on this, we were honored to be invited to participate in a webinar for the Black Educators Initiative, and we'll include a link to that and the podcast episode that came from it in the resource list. You know, at integrated schools, we truly believe that, as Thurgood Marshall said, unless our children learn together, there's little hope our people will learn to live together and understand each other. And while those are powerful words, we know that how that learning together happens is really important. So while we strongly advocate for parents with racial or economic privilege to desegregate our kids, to enroll in schools where they are in the minority, we feel a responsibility to also talk about the how. Our arrival in existing school communities is not guaranteed to be a force for good. So we have an obligation to be thoughtful, humble, and aware of potential pitfalls.
We often get the question, well, aren't you just advocating for gentrifying schools? And we understand this question and where it's coming from. It's a good one. And our response is that we are advocating for personal participation and investment in the public institutions that are often overlooked based on racist assumptions. And this personal participation isn't easy, right? It's not a matter of only changing the where our kids go to school. It's a whole lot of matter of how our families participate in the school community. And that's what we're going to focus on tonight, the how we show up. So now that we're going to introduce the others that are going to be joining us tonight, we are all members of the Integrated Schools Parent Advisory Board. And when we introduce ourselves, we're going to acknowledge the land that we come to you from. Erasure of who our respective lands were stolen from is a form of colonization. So I'll start. My name's Molly. My pronouns are she, her. I'm speaking to you tonight from the stolen land of the Quinnipiac, Wappinger, and Paugussett tribal nations. now known as New Haven, Connecticut. I have 5 kids ranging in ages from 5 to 21. One's about to be 22. Andrew?
Yeah, Andrew, he, him pronouns. I'm in Denver, the stolen land of, at varying times, the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and Sioux people. And I have 2 white daughters in the same integrating school that I went to. Anna.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anna. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white mom of 2 white kids, and I serve on the Integrated Schools Parent Advisory Board as well. I am speaking to you from the unceded traditional territory of the Serrano, or Yuhaviatam and Ma'are in San Bernardino, California. We are actually in the middle of a move from LA to Phoenix, so I am speaking to you tonight from our place of transition. Courtney?
Hi, everybody. My name's Courtney. I'm calling in today from Lenape-Hoking, which is the land of the Lenape people, currently known as Brooklyn, New York. I have a white, almost 10-year-old that attends 4th grade at the school up the block from us, and I also have an almost 3-year-old. Kim?
Hi, y'all. I'm Kim Gomez. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm talking to y'all today from the land of the Powhatan tribe, today known as Richmond, Virginia. I'm a white mom married to a man of Mexican descent, and together we have 4 kids. 3 of them are school-aged and attend a global majority school. So happy to be here with y'all tonight.
Thanks, everyone. So tonight, Anna, Courtney, and Kim will be talking to us about 3 of the ways that we as parents and caregivers with racial or economic privilege show up in schools. Anna will talk about rallying and recruitment. Courtney is going to share about parent and caregiver involvement and why our definition of an involved parent is often at odds with being a good integrating parent. And Kim is going to talk about our interactions with teachers, staff, and administration.
The 3 of them will be sharing their stories, but it just as easily could have been Molly or me or anyone else at integrated schools. We all have stories of how we've shown up in harmful ways. Since Integrated Schools was founded by the late Courtney McKitton in 2015, we've heard from parents around the country about the missteps we so often make in desegregating our kids. So many stories that we continue the work on a book that Courtney had actually started writing. The working title is How We Show Up, and it's designed to be sort of a workbook for integrating parents, sharing many of the lessons we've learned. Much of what you'll hear tonight is based on that content, and this is why the webinar is called Part 1. We will only get to some of that. The workbook, the webinar tonight are really designed to highlight some of the themes that come out of these stories, to make the invisible visible and to highlight tendencies that we may feel are unique to us, but that show up again and again across the country. And as we've tried to make sense out of those tendencies, an overarching theme that seems to unite them, and that's going to be our focus for tonight, is colonization, the taking over of existing structures with a view that they have little or no inherent value.
Colonizing as parents and caregivers in an educational context is how we show up and bring our white norm behaviors and expectations, and then use these as the lens through which we understand and participate in a school. It's about erasure through our presumptions that ignore the rich history that schools hold in communities and the inherent devaluing that our behavior so often implies. Schools are people and stories, and we have to enter these spaces with an honoring heart and mind, ready to listen and learn, because the stakes are high. We draw a direct through line from the colonization of Indigenous land by white settlers to the creation of our colonialist school systems. We trace this through line of colonization through our collective past, a past of stolen land and genocide, of stolen people and chattel slavery, of Indian boarding schools and their cultural genocide and human rights violations, of Jim Crow laws and massive resistance, of court-ordered desegregation that asked nothing of white people and placed all of the burden on Black and brown children, teachers, and families, a past and a present of redlining and generational plunder, of the Northern myth of post-racism and real silence, of mass incarceration, and of the police state that brutalizes and murders. So much time has passed and so little has changed. So we hold these truths as we talk tonight about how we can and must intentionally, thoughtfully, and respectfully be in school communities.
Yeah. So our first webinar, we talked about the adage to show up, shut up, and stay put. Tonight, we want to talk about why that's important and how to help ourselves do it better. The tendency to colonize is strong. It's woven into the fabric of our country, and it's part of white supremacy culture. It's the toxic air we breathe. And it helped creates the smog we often talk about of good and bad schools and how we parent. And while this is a 400-year project that we are not going to solve with one choice about where to send our kids to school, it does feel important to try to push back. And through the years, an antidote that has felt the most helpful to us in pushing back is relationships. Now, that's a pretty broad category. So to break that down tonight, we're going to be referring to a framework consisting of 3 interconnected, non-linear relationships. And those are relationship to self, relationship to community, and relationship to what we call workout groups.
Yeah, so relationship to self, right? This is our individual inquiry and reflection. It's about unpacking our baggage, revealing our own biases, and understanding our place in this work. So it's the books we read, the podcasts we listen to, the webinars we attend. This event tonight is really about deepening your relationship with yourself. It's one-directional, it's educational, it's important work, but it's not sufficient.
Yeah, so we also have our relationship to our community, and this is fundamentally about how we relate to the people who are relevant in our lives. On a small scale, this may be the other parents in our kids' class, their teacher. Maybe it's also about our relationship to our entire school, our neighborhood, our city, our state, the country, right? These relationships are multi-directional, they're about give and take, and they require an understanding of how broader power dynamics impact them.
And relationships to workout groups. So this is not actually about doing physical exercise together, but we do call these workout groups with the definition of workout as to bring about by labor and exertion. So the way that your exercise buddies might push you to work harder or help you keep at it when you want to give up, and recognize that you never finish working out, right? You get better, you get stronger, you develop more stamina, but you never arrive at fully worked out and then stop. It's ongoing work.
Right. These are people who can hold you accountable, who can carry some of the burden for you, who can knock you down when you need it, but also pick you back up. And often this is multiple different groups of people, right? Maybe it's a group of parents of color from your school who you've built some trust with, who love you enough to call you out when you need it. And maybe it's also a group of largely white and or privileged parents with whom you can share successes and failures and learn from each other. It's about relationships that hold in check our decisions and actions to make sure that they embody racial justice principles. And these 3 relationships aren't in any order and they aren't hierarchical. They all influence each other. So more self-learning helps you to show up differently in community. You share that experience with your workout groups and then receive feedback, which helps you show up differently, and the cycle continues.
Here at Integrated Schools, we rely on this framework of relationships and accountability internally. We hold ourselves responsible for dynamic learning and growth. We are all caregivers with racial or economic privilege, striving to make better decisions about how we show up in our school communities. Everyone on this call is part of a workout group for me. And as an organization, we have accountability to a board of advisors, largely Black and Brown experts in the field of education and school integration. We also have a parent advisory board, of which everyone here tonight is a member, that features several supporting advisors who are people of color who are compensated for the time they spend supporting us in our work and holding us accountable.
Yeah. Okay, Molly, I feel like we've set the stage. We're talking about colonization. We're talking about how these 3 relationships can help us push back on that tendency. And we're going to cover some of the ways that this shows up, but not all. But before we do, a few disclaimers. So first of all, this is really a discussion about how we show up and not a step-by-step how-to program. As with so much of this work, there's nuance and subtlety and local context that change. So our goal, at least, is to not be prescriptive, but rather to highlight some of our own personal missteps to hopefully open your eyes further and learn to focus on new ways of being. You know, we hold anti-racist school integration in one hand, and in the other, we hold anti-racist parenting. And the hope is that by holding both of those, we can raise a next generation to really be anti-racist. This work is a practice of learning, of trying to be different, of making mistakes, of learning more, and hopefully changing our lives.
Second, while we strongly encourage parents with racial or economic privilege to desegregate our kids, Integrated Schools does not advocate for the disruption of educational spaces and communities that are intentionally Black, Brown, and or Indigenous. We honor these spaces and consider them to be vital. We want to be clear that we're asking people to participate in the public commons, to consider why we don't enroll our kids in the vast majority of schools, and how to understand these choices inside of white supremacy and anti-Black racism. Speaking of white supremacy, Tama Okun's work on white supremacy culture drives a lot of our understanding and framing for this conversation. And if you aren't familiar with it or didn't get a chance to review it with the material that we sent out in advance, we strongly encourage you to spend time with it. It's been instrumental in our understanding of the tendencies that we see in ourselves and the ways those can negatively impact our school communities.
Yeah, and finally, we're not speaking as educators. 2/5 of this group here are, in fact, teachers, but we're not experts, right? We're speaking as parents and caregivers that are learning and sharing in the interest of collective growth and a new way of being. We envision being part of creating a multiracial democracy, and we believe that the only way to do that demands that we make different and new personal choices.
So a couple of points of housekeeping. We're about to close the chat until the main portion of our presentation is complete. And then we're going to open it back up for questions and answers at the end. You're all going to receive a feedback form after tonight. So please note your own thoughts and reactions, and please share them with us. This whole thing, the work, the webinars, it's iterative, and we really value your feedback.
Yeah. And before we go, we can't help but pause for a second. The Integrated Schools webinars are a bit of a bittersweet endeavor. Our beautiful friend, Integrated Schools founder, my former podcast co-host, Courtney McKitten, was really excited about workshops before her untimely death. She had done just a few of them and found in them potential for reaching people and bringing them into this movement. So it's an honor to bring much of her content along with us here tonight.
So Andrew, let's do this.
Let's do it.
Andrew and I are going to see you at the end to wrap this up, and then all of us will join you for some questions and answers. I'm so happy to pass the mic over to Anna now. Take it away, Anna.
Thanks, Molly and Andrew. Everyone, it's so good to be here with you all. Again, I'm Anna. I'm grateful to be here tonight. Okay, gather around. I'm going to start with a little story time about myself. Here we are. So I grew up in highly segregated suburbs, and even though the zoned school in my hometown neighborhood was and still is 95% Latinx, I always considered my neighborhood to be almost all white, never realizing that I was just erasing the existence of an entire part of my community, even as what I would have considered a woke adult. So we had kids, and I moved to an urban environment with a liberal progressive ideology. And, you know, I said at the time that I loved the culture and the diversity. And I think what I really meant was I loved good food. Because what I noticed, not consciously at the time, was, you know, we had enrolled our daughter in a private preschool that went up to 8th grade, because I had heard from all of the friends we were making in our neighborhood and neighbors that that's what good parents did. You know, and then I suddenly realized that while we lived in this diverse neighborhood, my friendships and social connections were all entirely white. So while I would take my kids to the park, I would only end up meeting and talking to other white parents, even though we were the minority at the park. And I realized I was doing the same thing with my kids that my parents did with me, despite my conscious desire to do the opposite. And I really just wanted to live better in my space. It was at that time that I met Courtney McKitten. And as we talked and got to know each other, I saw our local elementary school and realized it was exactly the same as the school I was zoned to growing up. And the narrative I had heard about it was all completely racialized. Unfortunately, because I didn't know anyone at the school and I was missing that third relationship with the school community, I started hosting meetings at my house. I tried to meet with the principal. I posted on Nextdoor. Who's going to this local school? Who's interested? Who wants to talk? And then, you know, some white and or privileged families contacted me and we got together. At one point, we actually had a meeting with the principal, and she was planning to retire. And she looked at me in the eye and said, if I was planning to gentrify this school, that she would postpone her retirement to prevent me from doing it. And man, I felt so called out. And ultimately now I am so grateful for her, because it was the first time ever that I had seen how I was perceived as a threat and not a benefit. And so what I was doing at the time was what we refer to as rallying. And I want to take a second here to identify that I often use the term our school, my school, as if I'm a student myself. And I think this is kind of common practice, but I'm trying to be more intentional, because kids are the students, not parents. You know, we seek community, so we want to identify as being in community, but sometimes that identity can be a little outsized. So I want to take a minute here to define, to shape how we define rallying and recruitment. This is how we've come to define rallying based on that observation and conversations over the past years. It's encouraging a group of white and or privileged families to join you in enrolling their children in a particular school that currently serves mostly Black or brown or low income students. So rallying is organized and led by families who are not yet a part of the school community, and it's something that happens prior to enrollment. And in contrast, another definition, another term we use is recruitment, which we define as a strategic effort that's actually led by staff and families whose children attend the school to encourage more families to enroll. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but I want to focus on rallying first. So as Molly and Andrew mentioned, this idea of colonization, and we believe rallying really is about colonization. And again, you know, antidotes to the colonization are the maintenance and care of those three relationships: relationship to self, relationship to workout groups, and relationship to the larger community. And it's been really helpful for me to look back and see where there was a negative impact. Which one of those relationships was I missing? Which relationship was I compromising? And then where there was positive impact, when something embodied growth, where were those relationships helpful and what did they facilitate? I'm going to slow down for a second because I feel like this is a place where it's really common to get defensive. This is a common occurrence. If this is you, if you relate to my story, don't freak out. I volunteered to present this part because this is what I did. I participated in perpetuating white supremacy culture at a global majority school. I made mistakes, and with the shared experience with the accountability community of integrated schools, I was then able to see the harm that it caused and attempt to push back against it, repair relationships, and change my behavior. I remember getting really defensive. There's a wonderful book by Lynn Posey Maddox called When Middle-Class Parents Choose Urban Schools that talked about how these things go sideways when white parents enter school spaces like this and how problematic white parents can be. And I remember throwing the book across the room in such frustration, thinking, what do you want me to do? I'm going to the school. I am a good, well-meaning person. I am a nice white lady. And I really wanted my intentions to override my actions, which did cause harm. And it wasn't until I addressed that harm by actually building relationships, talking to other parents whose kids had been at the school for a long time, and they were able to tell me how they felt erased, ignored, and devalued by the rallying we did and how we were showing up. Then I was able to step way back from my agenda and my ideas and start focusing on those relationships. And then I found my fit in the school community. So to define rallying more broadly, and why it is problematic and why we see it as problematic, I'm going to show you a slide. This is a real flyer sent out trying to rally other parents to a school. And it doesn't always have to look like this. You know, here, like, let's create a better school for our kids is what the flyer says. This could also look like tables at a farmer's market, meeting as a group with or without the principal, or a Facebook group dedicated to thinking about a certain school. And here are some of the message that it sends. We're here to save the school, right? This signals that we've identified a deficit at the school and we're not yet members of the school community. So we are, in fact, leading with what's wrong and not with what's right. This is white saviorism, which is something that dehumanizes, it cements racial hierarchy, it damages relationships, and that keeps us in that through line Molly mentioned of colonization, oppression, and then violence, which really prevents our collective liberation. The next is safety in numbers, otherwise known as a critical mass, right? It conveys that white and or privileged parents only feel safe or comfortable enrolling in a school with other white kids. This, again, dehumanizes our fellow families at the school because we don't really consider them our peers, right? Our kid won't be the only other student in their class because it's a school full of students. The next is the hidden gem, right? This idea of a hidden gem message. This assumes surprise that the school is good enough for our white kids. And it really also thinks solely about the school as a consumable good, right? What does the school give us? And that doesn't really prepare us to consider what it really means to integrate. And additionally, you know, if a school doesn't live up to those expectations, often white and or privileged families will leave. And that creates a mess for the school community to clean up. So this is where I want to talk for a moment about recruitment. What is a different idea to rallying? Because there are schools that are actually under-enrolled. And generally, in most places, we fund schools based on enrollment. So there may come a time where the school our kids attend need more students. And how can we participate in that in ways that don't turn into rallying? And in order to do that, we really have to be in touch again with those three relationships. Recruitment can turn into rallying even when we're at the school. When we aren't invested in those relationships, we aren't honest with ourselves about how colonization is both probable and painful in these circumstances, and we attempt to lead those efforts instead of following them. So back to my story, my experience for a minute. So there were about 3 white and or privileged families who enrolled at the same time as us at the school. And as that happened, lacking those necessary relationships, coming in with all of these ideas about what could make the school better. And, maybe some of those ideas were great. But the impact of coming in directly and these ideas coming directly from this group of privileged parents really was perceived as a takeover and as colonization. And that harmed my school community. And Molly and Andrew mentioned Tema Okun's characteristics of white supremacy culture. And in reflecting on that, I could see how the characteristics of individualism, of sense of urgency, and of objectivity really were at play. We didn't come in caring about others' visibility. We came in caring about our vision, our legacy, or about improving the school the way we wanted it to be. So what can we do instead? I want to end my part on a high note here. Here are some, and this is again, not a how-to, we're not trying to be prescriptive. These are just some lampposts we've seen and followed along the way. And just to reiterate something Molly mentioned, we are really talking about how people with racial and economic privilege show up. We are talking about white and or privileged folks. So 1, the language we use to talk about good and bad schools is racialized. So where we can, listen carefully to the language that we are using and the language our white and or privileged peers are using when talking about what we're seeking in a school or what we're rejecting as you consider schools, challenging ourselves and others to reflect upon where this deficit narrative is really linked to racism and white supremacy culture. We have a great guide available. It will be in the notes called the Awkward Conversations Guide, and you can download that. It's a great resource for how we have these conversations in order to disrupt that narrative. Next, we love and support what is there. So being prepared to love the things that are good about a school, because there are good things about every school, and we can go looking for those things. And when there are things that aren't good, we can wait until we've built those community relationships and really see if those are universally considered bad or unpopular in the school community, or really if it's just the whiteness we bring with us that makes us think that it's bad. Next, we can show up as soon-to-be school community parents and not as school shoppers. So if we feel the overwhelming need to get involved prior to enrolling, can we just show up to these gatherings that we are invited to? Spring concerts, open houses, things that the community is welcome to attend, smiling and listening, and not with a critical eye. And one other thing, if we feel compelled to meet with principal or staff, I'm really considering that we are taking these professionals away from the job that they're trying to do, and away from other school needs. And then building relationships before we're in community with principal and staff can really create power dynamics that impact the relationships we're trying to build within the school community. And it's always good to consider waiting. Finally, if we are asked, once we are a part of the school community, to participate in recruitment, can we keep these 3 relationships in mind and ask ourselves, am I dealing with my own white supremacy? Am I in a workout group? If so, can I ask if anyone has had similar experience with this? And then can I talk to my school community? Is this something a broad group of parents are interested in participating in, or other parents asked? And maybe we can create an opening by not participating for another parent to be involved instead. Basically participating as a helper rather than a leader. So I bared my soul a bit here. I explained about rallying and some of the harm it causes. And now I am going to send you off with Courtney to talk about what can happen after rallying and recruitment in parent groups and parent organizations. Thanks for sticking with me.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to be talking about PTAs now. Where I'm from, they're called PTAs. I know for some of you, they're PTOs, PAs, POs, just so we're on the same page. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the caregiver structured organizations at our schools. And so I'm imagining some people who are here tonight are saying, yes, PTAs, finally, let's talk about this. Let's talk about how we can do this and do this well. And then on the flip side, I feel like when I show up to PTA meetings at the school my son goes to, that I'm often looked at with eyes that are kind of like, Courtney, you need to chill. It's just the PTA. Let's get on with it. And part of this is the reason why I am presenting this section, because of that's where I'm at with PTAs right now. And so in a moment, I'm going to be talking about why and how we'd like to suggest that we are all open to consider different ways of being. This is really our job. If we are choosing this path of going against the grain with regards to how white and privileged people choose schools, that's really got to be the first decision of many decisions we make to push back on white supremacy culture. If the school choice is the only choice we make to push back on white supremacy culture, we have the real potential to do harm. And so making the decision to desegregate your child necessarily means that we are working toward new ways of being. So we aren't offering answers here. I don't have any answers, or at least not the answer. We're really encouraging the development and fostering of the three relationships because every local situation is unique. And so I'm going to share some experience that I've had over the past 5 years and some suggestions for pathways for how to show up. So I'm going to start with a story. And my story begins, like Anna's, prior to even enrolling my child in the school community. At the time, my professional life was working with young people in food and farm education, doing garden education in schools often. And so prior to enrolling my child, I walked into the school, walked right into the principal's office. At the time, I really thought that I could do that with such ease and comfort because I am a former New York City public school teacher. Now I recognize it's much more complicated than that, and my whiteness and the way our schools cater to white supremacy culture really played a large part in that as well. And so I went into the principal's office and I offered some free garden programming. Cut to the following year, my son is enrolled in pre-K. I show up at my very first PTA meeting and volunteer to chair the garden committee. Not participate in, not offer some time to do what needs to be done, but to actually lead a committee on the PTA when my son was first enrolled. Now, within about 2 years, that school garden is completely neglected. And I think back on this and think about how I really missed the opportunity in the time I devoted to giving to the school garden. I decided that's how I should be using my time. And I missed this really important window of opportunity, this chance to develop relationships within the school building. Even while I was going against the grain with regards to how white people I knew were choosing schools, I was falling right into the trap of how white people show up. I also want to be clear, this is a story about those three relationships. It's not a story about gardening. This could have just as easily been a story about bringing yoga to your school, or connecting to the local forest school organization, or getting those one-piece rain suits so the kids could go outside all the time, even in the rain. It could have been about any of those things. Because my professional life was in garden education, it was about a garden. And My 3 relationships at the time were just largely absent. My relationship to myself, I was not examining how who I was affecting my position within the school. My relationship to workout groups were not strong enough to help me see what I was doing in context. And my relationship to the larger community, it makes me laugh. There was no relationship there. My child had just started pre-K. There could not have been in relationship. And so because these relationships were not intact, I was showing up with so much white supremacy culture in all the moves I was making. I was showing up with a sense of urgency. This had to happen now. I was hoarding power because I could. I was saying progress was more and bigger. I was showing up saying this school there's some scarcity, something is lacking. And finally, one of the hardest characteristics of white supremacy culture for me to wrap my mind around was I was showing up with objectivity. I was saying, there's research on this. There are papers. Objectively, outdoor garden environmental education is good for all kids. It's not just me saying it. And, I think about it now, if I had gone in and been in community, a garden might have come out of it and it might not have. The garden wasn't the problem, the process was. And so, it's not that we're saying we should never lean on the unearned privilege we have. It's that we should not be the ones making the decisions on what privilege to use and when and how in isolation. I can say categorically now, I wish I had not shown up in that way when I did. The PTA at the school at the time was pretty representative of the school community, specifically racially and linguistically. And now, over the years, as more white and privileged people have joined the school community, even though it's still only about 8% white, priorities have shifted over time. Fundraising was moved to the top of the priority list. Many more structures were put in place, and the PTA is now almost entirely white. Its board is almost entirely white, and the membership is disproportionately white as well. And so I'm going to take a minute here to talk about why we're recommending you consider different ways of being and recommending that we ourselves consider different ways of being. There are disturbing trends at integrating schools where white people show up in large numbers where we hadn't been before. And to be clear, we're not suggesting that all PTAs uphold white supremacy culture. There are certainly schools where this is not the case. I would argue that the school my son attends was much more community-based prior to a few years ago. And I would also argue that in the Nice White Parents podcast, though the podcast doesn't spend much time on it, the PTA at that school prior to the white people coming in was very community-based. And so we just see, I know Andrew and Molly talked about this at the beginning, this is not, if you think this is unique to your school or even to your district, it's really nationwide a trend that is happening in integrating schools. And the PTAs, these structured organizations really are ripe for upholding white supremacy culture, largely due to the recognizable structures that are put in place, often specifically to fix what we see as missing, rather than in relationships. These structures provide a clear role for us to play. We're told this is what good parents do, right? We show up, we participate in the PTAs. And part of this too might mitigate some of the anxiety we feel about stepping into unfamiliar spaces. We want to propose that we step back and try to look at how white supremacy culture is playing out at our PTA. The more white supremacy culture is present, the more we are reinforcing ways of being and maintaining the white supremacy culture that perpetuates the colonization, violence, and oppression that Molly talked about in the intro. I want to come back to, in the beginning, I said sometimes people look at me like, chill, it's just the PTA, but I really truly believe, and we at Integrated Schools believe, that our small decisions, what some people might think of as small decisions, have a ripple effect out onto the larger community and the country. And these are about our decisions. We at Integrated Schools want to be part of putting the brakes on that through line and trying to build towards something new. And so within the context of PTAs, I kind of look at it three ways, right? We have, if our PTA is upholding white supremacy culture and we choose to be absent, not show up, our absence has the potential to uphold white supremacy culture because we are not there to try to push back. Our presence, just going with the flow, is also helping to maintain white supremacy culture. And so I want to argue that it is our job, if we are making these decisions, to show up and try to push back as best we can. I'm going to give you an example, but I'm also going to pad that example with, I really don't know that the decisions I make when I make them are the right decisions, if they're the wrong decisions. And I have this workout group. I have several different workout groups to kind of like pop some of these questions off with. So my example is, recently on a Zoom PTA meeting during the pandemic, on the call was the school's white principal, largely many white staff and a disproportionate amount of white family members and caregivers, and a total of about 15 people. And the topic came up of how to spend the Title I money for the year. And people kept unmuting and offering ideas for how to spend that money. And I had the option in that moment of staying quiet. I had the option of unmuting and giving another idea for how to use the money. And what I chose to do and what I saw as pushing back was unmuting and saying, this call is very unrepresentative of our school community. I'm hoping we consider there's other ways of making sure other voices are heard. Are there other ways? I don't know that that was perfect or right. I think maybe it could have been better. But that's what I did. I tried, and I showed up and did my best. Finally, in terms of why we consider different ways of being, PTAs really exacerbate structural inequities. Fundraising is the most common PTA activity. And when it's the most common PTA activity, we are buying into the smog, as Courtney McKinton used to say, the smog of how we talk about schools. It's feeding into the good schools narrative. When we say that school down the block is raising hundreds of thousands of dollars, we need to do that too. How can we do that? We are buying into this language of a good school is a school that does this. In addition, and I also want to add, it's also what Anna discussed. It's this racialized language, this language about schools, good schools and bad schools. And this urgency around fundraising prioritizes tangible resource acquisition over community building. And so when the skills of tangible resource acquisition are valued, it changes who shows up at the meetings and who decides to stay home. When it is seen as urgent rather than important, we act hastily and force decisions regardless of who is in the room. And we recognize the importance. We see the inequitable funding of our schools, and these should be community conversations, not initiatives bulldozed through by the few. There are some PTAs who strive to de-emphasize valuing certain skills and saying everyone has something of value to offer. We also hear a lot on the Facebook community page asking for examples of when PTA pooling worked. How do we get that going? And while we understand the urge to ask these questions and move in these directions, both of these are still very deficit-minded, seeing the school as something is missing, and they're very transactional ways of looking at the school as well. Some parent groups have sworn off fundraising for a year or two in order to develop relationships and build a leadership and membership that represents the school, thereby making sure the agendas and goals of the group are set by a representative group. So after struggling to maintain the school garden, I eventually quit as the garden committee chair. It was not a project that was pushed through by the community, and I was really making a lot of decisions in isolation. I was calling in favors to get things fixed, and it wasn't working, and I quit, and I really wanted to quit, like not show up to PTA meetings anymore. And also during that time, my 3 relationships were really developing at the school. And so my relationships to the larger community happened naturally as my son grew and participated in activities in and around the school with other families. And as that happened, I returned to PTA meetings and participated in active listening. At this time as well, I was developing more robust workout groups. Prior to this time period, when my son first enrolled in the school, my workout groups largely were made up of friends who are women of color. And as my work deepened, it became clear that I could not continue to only burden these friends with my whiteness. And so now I have integrated schools, the folks on this call, a few other parents locally that I can, that are there for me to hold me accountable, and we do that for each other. And finally, I also began ongoing deep investigations into how white supremacy culture shows up in me. And so while all this is happening, the school had an after-school program that was largely unrepresentative of the school community. And this was because it was exclusive, expensive, and really wasn't interested in being a part of the school community as a whole. At the time, lots of families were talking about both families in the program, families not in the program, and this was brought into the PTA. Now, on a good day, the PTA meetings had about 25 caregivers, and so the decision was made that the PTA wasn't a representative enough group to make any decisions. And so instead, the decision was made to survey families to find out what families really needed from an after-school program. And then they asked for volunteers. And I sat in the tension of weighing if this was a role I should step into. In my mind, I'd already embarrassed myself with chairing the guarding committee, but showing up in that way. And then I really thought about it, and this job is expressly for the purpose of hearing as many voices as possible directly related to relationship building. I had the privilege of time and space at that time, and I was being asked to use it. And so I volunteered for this job. Myself and a few other caregivers showed up at drop-off and pick-up for a couple of weeks and just asked families, what do you need? What do you need? And the result of this is coming to fruition in the coming year, about 2 years later, okay? When I reflect on what we keep saying as different ways of being, this one is kind of the most expansive to me. I think 5 years ago, the idea of working towards something that might take 2 years to come to fruition, I would not, I don't think, have been able to comprehend it. And when I think about the words show up, shut up, and stay put, I can really put myself in that little saying, right? I was showing up. I chose not to stay home, but to keep showing up. I shut up. It doesn't mean I didn't talk or participate ever, but I was listening much more than I was talking. And I stay put. Okay, so Anna alluded to this, but I'm sure we've all seen schools, or maybe we've been the people to leave in first grade, maybe second grade, because the school wasn't bending to the whims of what we wanted and desired from the school. But I decided to stay put, stayed with my child at the school. And so we're going to leave you today with some questions for our PTAs. Though integrated schools work really is this individual decision-making and pushing back, this is a big one that comes up a lot. And so for our PTAs, can we ask, are the voices of the few making decisions for the many? Is our leadership representative of the school demographics? Are parents from all racial, socioeconomic, and linguistic backgrounds serving? If the answer to these questions are no, I don't have a prescription, but we would say slow down. Second question, are we allowing a sense of urgency and a need for productivity and efficiency to take precedence over community building? Third question, do we have a common purpose? How was it determined, and who was present at those discussions? And I think that bears repeating, who was present when the purpose of the organization was decided upon? And finally, what would be different about your PTA if fundraising was not the top or only priority? And finally, to deal with all of this that we're talking about tonight, these are some questions I ask myself in an ongoing manner. If I am asked to lead some kind of work, am I considering who is asking me? If I feel like if I don't do this, no one will, am I considering what is the urgency? Why won't anyone do this? Why won't anyone else do this? What will happen if I decline? If I accept, am I able to check myself? Do I have a workout group to check me? And am I in relationship with the community I'm being asked to serve? Second question I ask myself is, have I spent the time to understand this group that existed before my arrival? Its purposes, goals, relationships, needs, and structures. Am I positioning myself physically in spaces where I'm only able to converse with other white underprivileged families? So this one is not a question for up here, it's a question for our bodies. Where am I putting my bodies at meetings? And in the time of the pandemic, who is on the group text, who is on the WhatsApp chat, and who isn't? And finally, I ask myself as often as I can remember why am I engaging? Is every time I'm engaging to ask clarifying questions or to offer up advice, opinions, and ideas? Okay, this section was about interactions in structured caregiver organizations. Thanks for being here. And now Kim is going to talk with us all about staff interactions.
Perfect. Thank you so much. My gosh, I really mean it when I say I've learned so much tonight. And even though I'm sitting here waiting for my part to come up, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm writing notes because even more things are coming to me. So really, thank y'all. I mean that. So full disclosure for my part, when we were talking about who's going to do what part in the workshop, I did not want this part for staff interactions because staff interactions are hard and they're hard for me. So I would prefer to show up as someone who it seems like I've got it all figured out, but I don't. And this part is fluid. So there's been times when I've like really done a ton and messed up and felt like I needed to pull back because I did. And then there's been times, kind of as Courtney was alluding to, where I was almost like paralyzed by this fear that I'm going to do something wrong. And so I stayed back and wasn't even an authentic or engaged member of the community. And so the hope for tonight is that we're going to be able to really make some of the things that are invisible more visible. And as we've talked about, white supremacy culture wants to kind of keep these things that are in line with white supremacy culture invisible. But our hope is that as they become more visible, we'll be able to see ourselves and how we can have shown up in school community. And then I also just want to say why this matters. Like, how do you interact with staff? Why does that really matter? And it matters because it impacts relationships. So how I interact with everyone in the school building impacts my relationship. And also, I bring my entire history with me. I bring my whiteness, I bring my privilege with me. So nothing that I'm doing is in isolation. And then I also want to say that this is real work. So I've got to be real with myself. I've got to be real with my people, my workout people, and I've got to be real with my broader community. So now let's just jump right in to these archetypes. And so these are the different ways that white folks can show up and as they interact with staff. And I just want to say that this came through the work of Courtney, our founder, Courtney Mykeden, that she was having tons of conversations with white underprivileged folks across the country. And so began to see all of these different trends, right, of how white people were showing up in their school community. And so if you're like me, you might see yourself in all three of them. You may see yourself in some bits larger than others. So the first one that I'm going to talk about tonight is the mama bear, papa bear, caregiver bear. And since I'm a mom, I'm going to talk about it from the mama bear point of view. But this person has this heightened sense of risk. And it's really keyed in on their particular child. And so I like to envision this one as the person who is outside of their child's door, like beyond the first, week of school or whatever, first couple of days. And they're right there, right by the kid's door. And they're just making sure their particular kid hangs their backpack up in the particular right spot where it's supposed to go. Also, you could imagine, I'm thinking these are kind of elementary school examples, but this mama bear maybe is in the cafeteria showing up to eat lunch with their son or daughter, and Johnny has gotten chocolate milk when you went through the line, but now there's like this new vanilla organic milk that has showed up. And so a mama bear person, you know, goes and personally escorts Johnny over so Johnny can trade out his milk and get the organic milk that mama bear deemed appropriate. And so like why that actually matters too is that's not happening in isolation. For that person that's sitting in the cafeteria or moving about the cafeteria, the staff that's in the cafeteria, the parents who have been there before, they're all seeing that. And that impacts your relationship with all of those folks that are in the school community. Okay, the second one is the super helper. So this person is indispensable. And this is not just like your go-to volunteer for one thing, it's the go-to volunteer for all of the things. And when we think about why this could be problematic in an integrating school is that if white parents find themselves in this role, then who is not being asked to be in this role? You can make it more difficult for Black and brown families who have been there to be able to show up if you're the person who's doing all of these things. And so it's been helpful for me to be able to like think of a particular example. So the super helper person would be the parent that wrote the $75,000 grant to get this playground going. And then the super helper shows up at the ribbon cutting ceremony with coffee and donuts to like usher in this big moment for the school. And so if we think about that, like, why is that a problem? It's because it serves to exacerbate existing inequities. So you've got speedy access to the principal, and I, as a white woman, I already have outsized influence in the school. So now, if I'm showing up in that role, like that's grown even larger. And so you just think about who the principal would continue to go to. Is it the person that's doing all of the things, or if instead could there be a way that there's a collective of parents that are working to do these? Okay, and then the third one I want to speak about is the colleague. So this is the person who expects relationships with staff to work like coworkers. Okay, so you're on equal footing with that person. And really this is hard because white supremacy culture has us hardwired to act in these ways. So you've read the scholarly article that's talking about homework and like the pros or cons of homework. And then because of how we've been set up, you are seeing yourself on equal footing with your child's teacher. So you're ready to be able to explain to them about this article that you read about homework via text or dojo or email. And if you're a colleague, right, then you're on equal footing. And so your demands are met more quickly. This can also serve to challenge the teacher's expertise. Like if I think about this, I was a teacher, but I'm not my kid's teacher, right? So again, this colleague role, it serves to impact our relationships with other parents in the building. Okay, and I just want to be frank here that none of these things on like face value are bad. If I think about like the mama bear person, like that's me. I'm big hugs, big love for my kids. The super helper one, we were kind of laughing when I was talking about this, but this is real. For Christmas a couple years ago, I asked my husband to buy me like certain sneakers because I was like, I move really fast. I'm in and out of schools. I can do all these things. I need definite sneakers to help me be able to do this. The colleague part, I was a teacher, I was a reading specialist. So like, whoa, so much of this just hits me. And if you're feeling that in any way, I get you, I see you, I feel you. And I just want to say I am recognizing more and more how I bring my entire history and all of my whiteness with me. So it matters. And I just want to take a second right here and pause. And I'm going to take a breath. I am not a should person. I don't like to tell people what you should do. And I'm going to go ahead and should you right now. If you're a white person on this call, you should send your kids to a global majority school, full stop. It's going to be work. At times it's going to be hard work. And it is not going to undo 400 plus years of horrific violence, exploitation, plunder, oppression. And where you send your kid to school still matters. So to be able to engage in this, I'm going to have to have relationships to sustain me. And so we've talked about these so much throughout tonight, but really this relationship to myself, this is my deepening humility. Like I'm going to fall flat on my face and I'm going to love myself and keep going. And that's going to continue to deepen. My workout people, these are the people who love me, who I love, who push me to grow, who hold me accountable, but also who laugh with me. Like, I need them in my corner to be sustained in this work. And then my broader community, right? That's my school community, my neighborhood, wherever my family and I are putting our bodies and interacting with people, I'm working to grow that community. And so now my hope is that as we've talked about these different relationships, I'm going to give you just two quick little anecdotes from personal experiences that happened at the school. And I can see where one of my relationships really helped me navigate that situation. Okay, so the first one, this is kind of when I would fall more into this like colleague archetype role. So my oldest daughter's teacher, I love her. She's a great teacher. She's really talks a lot about social justice. The books she's reading are great, right? I can totally vibe with her there. The kids are still engaged at this point in the year to get on early to talk with her on Google Classroom. Like, she's just all the things. I want to be around her. So anyway, this fall we had done an outdoor like pumpkin festival, and I see my daughter's teacher come like into the middle of the circle. And as I'm reflecting upon this now, it's like the sun was behind her. She had this cool trendy hat on, and I was on the outskirts before that. But I came in pretty quickly and went to go engage with my daughter's teacher. And as I'm sitting there in the middle of the circle talking to her about how my daughter's doing and how the school year is going for her, I thought, whoa, how much space am I taking up right now? And then I also thought about someone who's in my group. I thought about Anna and how recently we had a conversation where she had mentioned to me that she felt like she was taking up too much space with her daughter's teacher, a very similar situation. And I thought, where's my body? Let me think about what Anna had said, how she had pulled herself back. Yep, let me slide on back to the sidelines where I was supposed to be painting pumpkins with kids. And I can move back, and likely there was another parent who also probably really likes this teacher who had the opportunity then, if I wasn't taking up all the space, to be there to interact with this teacher. So my relationships with my people really helped me in real time be able to navigate that. And then the super helper, oh my gosh, this is so me. So remember how I talked about the sneakers. I've got them, right? I can move fast, get a lot of things done. And when Courtney, our founder, came and she shared this work in Richmond when she did a workshop, I remember feeling live time in that moment, like, whoa, so much of me is in here. So here's the quick story. So we had a dance class that the school had figured out. This was pre-COVID back in February. And so we wanted to have more after-school opportunities at the school. It was a representative group of parents from the school who said, yes, dance class sounds good. We had staff buy-in. It's good participation. Seemed to be checking all the boxes in terms of what the actual school community wanted to do. Okay, so they need this flyer to go out. It's like, I guess, the flyer for February so that people can know what's going on. In this happening, I realized that my name, Kim Gomez, was on the flyer in 3 spaces. Also, when we're getting ready to get this flyer to go out to have for parents to know what's going on, I am the person, so my name's on it 3 times. I had helped make the flyer. Then we need to get it printed to get to teachers, and so I'm showing up the school. And as I'm in the office, there's like a little barrier between like where parents are sitting to sign out their kids and then where staff goes behind to make copies. And since I was a teacher, I'm comfortable in schools, I was like, oh, and I saw the secretary was busy. Can I pop back here and make the more copies for you? That's super helpful, right? And then, like I said, because I have my sneakers on and because I'm so used to schools and how they work, I can not only make the copies, but I know like it's getting close to the bell ringing. Let me go run and deliver these to each teacher so they can send them home with kids in their backpacks in time for the end of the day. But I shared that with like my broader community, just that example. And I remember someone said back to me like, whoa, I don't want to be a Kim Gomez. And I was like, oh, that stung. But then as I've even reflected on that experience, as we've been talking about it for this workshop, my relationship with myself has deepened so much for me to realize like, whoa, of course, like I did way too much. And I've thought about it even more like, how did that impact, there were parents that were on the other side of the the gate, waiting to sign their kids out. Like how could that have impacted my relationship with them? How could that have impacted their kid's relationship with my kid? So just thinking about that and me really loving myself, but also me really seeing myself like, whoa, Kim, yeah, you did too much. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that I won't help again. And it doesn't mean like, damned if I do, damned if I don't. It does mean I'm going to develop thicker skin. I'm going to keep showing up, and that my relationships, all of them, I'm going to work to deepen them. And so I know when I go and I fall flat on my face, I'm going to be able to get back up with a greater understanding, and I'm going to be able to stay the course. And I know I can, and I know so can you. And so I just really want to say from the bottom of my heart, I'm grateful to be in this with you. So thanks.
Thank you, Anna, Courtney, and Kim. We're going to be opening the chat now, so feel free to add any questions that you might have. Everyone's going to be back on the screen in just a sec to answer as many questions as we can. But first, we're going to pause, right? That was a lot to take in. So maybe we can just all reground ourselves a bit and take a deep breath. I wish I could see you all, right? I'm still not used to this.
I'm breathing, Molly. I promise I'm breathing.
Yeah, no, I'm not checking on you. Just still wish I could see everyone that was here. So I just want to focus for a moment on these three relationships as a way to push back on the tendency to colonize. This is a webinar. It's unidirectional, and this is really about self-work. Hopefully it's opened your eyes a bit more. You've got some things to think about, some ways to reflect on yourself. And it's certainly what I've taken from the stories that Anna, Courtney, and Kim have shared, a chance to reflect on ways that I've shown up that have been problematic, where I haven't been fully in relationship, and where I haven't tended enough to the impact of my actions, regardless of my intent.
Yeah, but the work can't stop with this relationship to self. So we encourage you to take this information, to metabolize it, internalize it, but then to really think about your other relationships. Anyone here with kids is probably familiar with the strong desire to have relationships with other parents, particularly when our kids are young, right? To process the overwhelming number of choices we have to make for our kids, all of which often feel like they're incredibly high stakes. It can be overwhelming. It can be lonely. And that's why the relationships we form in that phase can have such a massive impact on how we think about the project of child rearing. So much of this smog that we often talk about, good and bad schools, what it means to be a good parent and get the best for our kids, is created and recreated in those relationships. So if you're in that phase, you've got young kids, maybe you're thinking about having kids, ask yourself, who are your workout groups, right? Who are the people that you're in relationship with, who can push you, who can hold you up, who can knock you down if you need it, who can make sure that you're showing up for justice? And if you're past that phase, it doesn't mean it's too late, right? Like, it just means that the work may take a little longer. There may be more digging to do, more to unpack. But ask yourself, who can you do that work with?
And one of the places that we'd love for you to do that work is with us at Integrated Schools. Our founder, Courtney McKitten's brilliant insight was that we need community. We need to know that people like us do things like this. And so Integrated Schools strives to be a place where we push each other, we hold each other accountable, but that we also pick each other up when we inevitably fall on our faces, as Kim said. So join us. We've got nearly 30 local chapters now. We have a parent-to-parent program, a book club. We also have a Facebook group, and we're constantly striving to create more space for building those relationships.
And finally, we have to think about our relationship to our communities, doing all the self-work we can, developing a great workout group to help us. None of that actually changes the world without working on our relationship to our communities. And I think everyone mentioned at some point that these relationships are often slow to develop. There's trust that needs to be earned. But show up, shut up, and stay put, and trust that these relationships will come. And when it feels like you need to get active and, change your school and use your privilege, know that doing that prior to being in relationship can be dangerous, right? That tendency is strong, and it's important to push back on it. But that's not to say that shutting up is the final destination, right? Like, all schools need something. No school is perfect, and our systems of education have many flaws. The promise of third wave school desegregation, of true integration, is better schools for everyone. but that better has to be defined in community. It has to be defined outside of the lens of white supremacy culture without a colonist mindset. And we do that through relationships. We do that with skin in the game, in solidarity. And then we advocate for change that's designed to really benefit all kids.
And as we said at the start, there's going to be a second part to this, and we look forward to announcing it soon. And in that webinar, we'll discuss within school segregation, right? So that's in the form of tracking gifted and talented after school programs, our racist notions of safety and discipline, and more. We'll be sending out the resource list that includes a recording of tonight's webinar, as well as links to the work of many of the thinkers who have influenced us. And we're also considering a multi-week workshop model, which would have small cohorts, so we could really dig into some of this material in relationship. So if this interests you, please do let us know in the feedback form.
Before we jump into the Q&A, we just want to say thank you. Thank you for showing up, for spending some of your precious time with us this evening, and for being willing to engage in these often contentious topics. We know we don't have all the answers, but we believe that we can't let that fear paralyze us. So while it's a bit terrifying to put on a webinar like this, we're grateful to you for watching, for engaging, and for pushing us to know better and do better. So I want to bring everyone back here, and we will try to answer whatever questions we have in there. So make sure you put them in the comments, and we'll try to get to whatever we can. Welcome back, everybody.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, friends.
Where you been?
So we've got a few questions coming in, more on the way. We appreciate you bearing with us with the chat off for the actual thing. I know they're all come flying in here, but maybe we can start with this here. Seems like y'all, I can't pull off y'all, are talking a lot about harm that can be done. Do you have any examples of things going well in your school community? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Gosh, it's really hard to think about these things this year, right, with the pandemic, but I would love to. I want to hear you guys.
I would say the developing of a relationship for the new after school program based on the story I shared is a really positive in community development.
Yeah, I feel like after school things have changed, and just like the thinking about who is representing or who's leading it, you know. And so I know we had some conversations like that at our school, and just the feeling that like it was, for example, for my kids to show up, and it was a after school, this was like a running thing, and it was being led by a Black husband and wife. Anyway, the white folks who had originally started to do it pulled back and realized that no, they shouldn't be, and were more intentional in terms of figuring out who should be leading it, and just what it actually felt like to be a parent showing up, and my kid and myself, we were just participants in that process, right? It felt like the school community. So it was small, but good.
Yeah, I feel like they're often little things, right? Go ahead, Anna.
Oh, I was going to say, I know when our parent group focused less on fundraising, like Courtney mentioned, and more on community events. One I can think of was we had a parent whose sibling was a professional salsa dancer. And so she had suggested that we have a salsa night. And it was free. It wasn't a fundraiser. It was just a fun community event. And I have never embarrassed myself more publicly than I did that night. And it was, you know, fabulous.
I would also like to add, before the pandemic, there was a bunch of parents starting to plan a spring carnival, which is a bigger one than we'd had before. And it was really sprung up from the community. And I mentioned to this group, I was really looking forward to, you know, being asked to do something and jumping in that way. And I am hopeful that post-pandemic that will happen again.
Nice. That's a good one here. Megan asks, any advice on building community relationships in a school community without a PTA or formal parent organization, especially as an introvert?
You know, I would say actually the first thing that I think I did at our school, which was just day after, like I have to, the school where my kids go, like the bus doesn't take them there. We open enrolled to go to a global majority school. So anyway, so I drive them. So I'd be there for pickup every day. And you have to walk past the playground before you hop in my minivan. And so anyway, we would just stop on the playground. And like, so it was like super informal. And I remember like early on just getting to know a dad and his kid who stayed. And like, that was it. There was no, we were just shooting the shit on the playground.
Yeah, I feel like a lot, my recent school experiences have been sort of trying to stay out of the PTO, it's PTA where I am, sphere, right? And then try to forge a way to meet other parents. And I did find that just sort of resisting the ways that were really obvious for me to do it, right? So like the PTO, or how I would see neighbors on the blacktop before and after, by almost making myself not available in those spaces, and being somewhere else during those times, I would inevitably meet people, particularly through my kids, right? Like they would be drawn to a child who would have a parent, and then we would just get to talk. And I'd be really glad to meet, because often the kids that my kids would talk about weren't necessarily the kids whose parents I knew. I mean, sure, sometimes, but often not. So often it was about not being, right? Like not being where it would be easy for me to put my body.
And to add to that about, I feel like Molly often talks about like following our kids' lead, which I learned so much from. I've heard this also from other people who identify as introverted, that this can be really challenging. And another idea is also, right, asking your kid maybe who they're drawn to and all that stuff, but also like what activities are the other kids in your school engaged in? And so this happened with us where this is how we learned about Taekwondo. My son enrolled, and some of my strongest relationships in the school are through that experience, which came from my son hearing about what some of his friends were doing, and finding ways to participate in activities outside of the school community as well.
Nice.
Yeah, that's a whole topic that we've talked about, right? Like the extracurriculars, because often you can have your kid attend a school, but if their social life is constantly reinforced in extracurriculars that aren't tied to their school and aren't tied to the friendships, that is just a real disrupted social line for your kids and for yourself in terms of meeting people. So yeah, as Courtney says, kind of learning about some of the things that might not be very obvious in your white upper middle class set, right? Like public programming is often undersubscribed. We should use it, and it's where people go. The public goes.
Right. That is a good one. How much have you explicitly engaged with your own kids about your school choice and the ongoing learning and slipping up that you do, and talking with them about how they show up? This is a great question. Thank you, Meredith.
It's good.
I think we probably all have slightly different answers because we have slightly different aged kids. Particularly Molly's got older kids, so the conversations change a little bit. But anybody want to jump in there?
Well, I'll just say one thing that, yeah, I say it to my oldest often, like, how much space are you taking up? And she likes her teacher. It's obvious that her teacher likes you. And now I guess that's a benefit of virtual school, like I kind of walk by and I'm like, back it up. But I've got to be seeding that in other ways for that to actually become like something that she's carrying through on her own, but it's hard to, right, figure that out for yourself and then to impart that knowledge, with your kids, but that ongoing conversation.
Yeah, I guess I could take a stab at this just because I recently switched schools, right? Like I have a lot of kids, older and younger, and we realized, I had one of my children's in second grade, and when she started kindergarten in the school, she had a sister in the 8th grade, and then she has a younger brother. And so we were like, oh, look, we're going to be at this school for 19 years, right? And that seemed awesome on one hand, but then we were like, oh, that's a long time to be at a school. And what does that, mean?
Right.
There's like an open choice in New Haven where I am, and so you just can go anywhere. And so, yeah, my daughter loved her school, and it was the school that we'd been attending in the family for a while. But we spoke to her about how we were going to make a different choice, and we just really talked about that, right? Like, we go through our city and we see other schools, and talking about how schools are really portals to community, and how we play t-ball and we get to meet a whole bunch of kids from different schools when we do t-ball. And so really just almost kind of pulling the lens out at how there are just so many spaces in our city, and what a pleasure it is to interact, and how going to a different school opens up that opportunity. And that when, she can keep the friends she has, but life is long. And then also giving examples, right? Like, I have some friends that I've had for a really long time, and constantly meeting new friends. So, speaking from the I, but also speaking about like the family, right? Like, this is what we're going to do. And she freaked for like, I don't know, a dinner. And then she was fine. And she's made friends on the computer. She just, yeah.
I would also venture to say that most of us in this call probably talk pretty explicitly to our kids about whiteness, and that we are white. And, the school my son goes to is majority Latinx. And so a lot of kids are light skinned, but that doesn't mean that they're white. And talking about the different way kids are treated within the school, the different way his Black friends are treated versus him as a white person, specifically what Kim's talking about how he shows up in the space he's in, pretty explicit conversations. And then I don't know if this happens with you all, but I have like very explicit conversations with my dad, and my son always is kind of there. And so he hears, what we're talking about. And he is mostly thinking about video games, but I try to be as honest about the choices we make, so he knows that they are intentional, and without being overbearing, which is, I have not mastered that yet.
Yeah.
I'm always just surprised by how much better those conversations go than I like imagine them with my kids, right? Like, it's easy to like get in your head about, and I've got to say all the things, I've got to say them all at once, and I've got to make sure they've like got this full. And you sort of like start in, and it just sort of makes sense. They're like, oh yeah, okay, cool, yeah, for middle school, the one down the block, like, it's really almost all like, there's not a lot of different kids. There's like mostly all white kids there. No, yeah, that doesn't sound like that would be very interesting. And it's like, oh, cool, that actually wasn't nearly as terrifying as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, and do we live in a place that looks like the school, right? Like, there is just sort of like, we live here.
And that we love our neighbors and we want to go to school together is a big piece of the conversations we have because of our specific living situation.
Yeah. All right, I don't know that we have anything useful to offer here, but I hope we can find something. Thoughts about engaging with families who don't speak English when you only speak English. This is a huge barrier in so many places. I certainly have nothing useful to offer here. Maybe Anna definitely does.
I saw this question, and I'm so glad it got asked. So yeah, we are at a predominantly Latinx school. And many parents, Spanish is their first language. And two things, and this is my experience only, not to say other people haven't had this experience, but I'm speaking from the I here. I have found great success in putting real intentional effort into learning Spanish. Putting real intentional effort into making sure where there are organized meetings that translation is synchronous and available. And that has sort of been where I have spoken up when I do, to make sure that in parent organization and school meetings, and now on Zoom, like, that is a common request, that it happens synchronously and not asynchronously, so parents aren't waiting. But in terms of personal relationships, one thing I have found is, as my children have grown, as my older daughter has grown and her relationships have deepened and she has led those relationships, I have been able to build relationships with parents and by involving their bilingual children, right? So the majority of my kids, my daughter, and I remember when Lucy was in kindergarten, she said, gosh, it's not fair. All of my friends speak 2 languages and I only speak 1. And that she could see that as a asset and not a deficit was really a great benefit for us. And so bringing, so often when I would need to talk to a parent, bringing her friends in on the conversation and not centering English, but saying, I don't speak Spanish. Can you help me? I would love to ask your mom this question. And then she would be able to translate and then respond. And then, of course, like it's always an icebreaker when I, am trying to learn Spanish intentionally. And I have found a lot of grace in my community as a result of that decentering of English.
Nice. Wait, are you talking, Courtney? I know it's not Zoom.
I just needed some comic relief. Yeah.
It's only the 13th month of the pandemic. We will get through.
Ouch. Okay.
Somebody will do it.
But I did want to echo what Anna said about, learning as much as you can, speaking what you can. And also at the school my son goes to, there's a large Chinese population as well. And I've fully used Google Translate on my phone when, that parent has enough English. I have no Chinese. We're trying. And then it's like, hold on a minute. Put it in Google. We have phones, right? We put it in Google Translate and we have full conversations like that. So really just like, I think the advice would be like, I don't know, just try whatever is possible for communication the best you can.
All right, there's a good one. You need to share an example of repairing a relationship that was harmed and some of the ways you approached that. Put everybody on the spot.
I feel like Kim, I know of an example Kim has shared with me, but I'll go first, not to totally put her on the spot. I know when I had heard from parents about the harm that the rallying that we did caused and what it looked like to the now former principal, being able to make eye contact with someone and refuse to use the word but, and just saying, like, and you can feel it. I'm sure we can all relate to this physical feeling of how we don't have a lot of examples set for us. For me, in my white cultural upbringing, I don't have a lot of examples for what it looks like to make repairs. So to just be to be able to say, I'm sorry, I did that wrong, and I can see that it harmed you. I want to do it differently. And if you have any suggestions for how you'd like me to, that's great. And if not, I understand. And I'm going to reflect on where I can improve in this area. But what I meant was not, we have a playground now, not everybody loves theater. Like just.
You could tell me, Anna, what yours was of mine, and I'll see if I give me a code word, maybe. Or I can share another one. I got lots of them.
I was thinking of the example. I think it was something we talked about in the last webinar. Yeah.
About the birthday party thing.
Yes.
Yeah, I could share that one. There's an even more recent example though. I was thinking of I had offered something like that my family was going to be able to do something that was helping another family. In this particular instance, this was a Black woman who I was like beginning to get to know and offering something for her kid. And basically, she called me and she was like, "Oh, we got to talk about this." And I thought she was going to be like, "Thank you so much." Like I thought the next thing out of her mouth was going to be like, "Great." And it was like that long pause. And it was basically like, yeah, I don't know how I feel about this. And like, I feel like you're trying to be white savior to me and like all this. And so she just like said everything. My heart was pounding. I remember I was driving in the minivan, and then I listened. And I was like, let me get home and call you back and just listen. And I remember she stopped me as I was starting to say, I'm sorry. She said, don't stop. Like, don't say you're sorry. Pretty much shut up and listen. And so I did that, and we continue to do that with each other. Like, she is now a dear, like, we are dear friends to one another, and like our kids are, and so, but I never had a white friend say that to me, in that way. And so it was just an opportunity to like get some thicker skin and know, yeah, like, just sit with it. She's telling you, listen, and show up differently, so.
Nice. All right, we're going to do one more, try to be respectful of time here. What does this work look like in high school when typically parent volunteering impact is lower than, say, elementary school? I think we may have to turn to Molly. I don't have high school kids. I was like very narrow focus on what I know, but.
Yeah, I have not been involved in my kids' high schools at all. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't.
I just have one. We have one NYC chapter member that shows up all the time, and her kids are in middle school, applying for high school. So not quite high school, but what I gather from the way she talks about her involvement is really just supporting her kids' decisions, right? So like talking to the kids about all the options for schools, but factually and with history, right, and truthfully supporting their decisions and also supporting their friendships. I think that's what I've heard is like the biggest part of how we show up as parents as our kids get older. I just wanted to share that. And I don't know if she knows I'm talking about her, but I'll tell her.
Yeah, I mean, that is something, right? Like just supporting your kids in being able to like be involved as much as they would want to be involved. And I mean, the conversations get more and more explicit and just very direct. I have a daughter in high school right now who she's white, was automatically tracked into an AP class that it's not supposed to be happening like that at that school, right? Like happened anyway. She had to like, she's untracking herself. These are things that it's not like, oh yeah, she learned that from me, that's because of me. That is really because of like a family culture. Alongside, she's an emerging adult, right? Like she knows the racial climate. She's doing her own anti-racist learning. And so I have found that like an involved parent really does just begin to look like, bring your kid along, right? Like have them in a way, like be part of their workout group and have them be part of your workout group. Because I have been totally schooled by my kids, like in so many ways, like as much as I might think that I'm like, once a punk, always a punk, like that's so wrong. Like I'm totally just a weird mom. My kids are punk. So anyway, yeah, I just feel like bringing them in and really honoring how much they know and how much they're thinking about this, particularly right now, and to really honor what they actually might be learning from Instagram, like that how much content is being shared with them and ways that they're bringing that in. I know I'm getting off the question, but I think that's really important to honor content that they're getting in whatever ways their age group is getting it. So
yeah.
I love that. And I will just add, we're really short on time, but I do want to say there are two student groups that I know of that are specifically youth-led and youth-run groups, Integrate NYC and Teens Take Charge. They're both in New York, but I know there are groups all over the country. I know in LA, LA Students Deserve is another group. And these can be really helpful. I know for me, when I think about my tiny babies being high schoolers and what that means when we are, as a family, practicing anti-racist school integration, I am so inspired by these groups that are predominantly Black and Indigenous and people of color, youth-led groups fighting for educational justice and equity and integration, meaningful integration. And so bringing those resources and sharing them with high schoolers to, just like we say, people like us do things like this, kids do things like this too.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Molly, Anna, Kim, Courtney. This was great. Thank you to everyone for watching. Please share the link. You'll all be receiving a feedback form. The only thing we ask is that you just take a couple minutes to let us know what worked, what didn't, what was missing, what could have been better. This is, I think, as Molly said, an iterative process. So we're always looking to know better and to do better. We would love for you to come join us in all sorts of ways. We've got our parent-to-parent program. So if you're looking for a parent who's kind of been through it, you're thinking, getting started, thinking about desegregating your kid, maybe you're in the midst of it and things are challenging, we've got people to connect you with. We have local chapters in, I think, now almost 30 cities. Love to connect you with those people. We've got our book club. So coming up in July, we're reading The Sum of Us, Heather McGee. It's fantastic. So we'd love to have you join us for that. We've got a Patreon page where you can support the podcast and the podcast work. We've also got podcast happy hours that happen over there. Lots of ways to build that community, to try to let us be part of your workout group, because it's so important and it's such a key ingredient to trying to do this better. We know we can't do it right, but we know that we have to try to do it better. So thank you again. Thank you to Courtney McKitten for getting us on this journey, for so much of the content that we shared tonight that came from her, and to all of you for being here. And we're hoping to plan another one of these probably sometime in the fall. We don't want to say exactly because then we have to stick to it, but sometime coming up, we will get into some of the other issues that are out there. So in the meantime, get in touch, hello@integratedschools.org, and we will see you somewhere out there. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Good night.